Thank you, Tejas.
Hey. Oh, nice to meet everyone. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we can't meet in person. This is mostly what we have been, my lab have been working on for the, one of the direction that we have been keep working on for 2-3 years. So the title is Seamless and Natural Communication Between Humans and Machines. So the idea is always how to make sure that when when human communicates with machines, if they can be as natural as another human talking to another human. So in the process, we are looking at different directions. So today we're mostly talking about one type of system called persuasive conversational systems. So if people know conversational systems, you probably know there are two types of conversational systems. One is task-oriented system that you have a particular goal to complete a task. While social conversational systems are more sort of free form. You can talk about anything, and it's mostly about bonding. Task-oriented systems, usually system and user do have an aligned goals, such as book a flight together, book a restaurant together, search for bus information. While for social chatbots, it's about, like I talked about, anything about the word or about you with anyone at any time. So this is one of the example of my student talking to our Amazon Alexa social chatbot, who has won Alexa Prize previously. Let's see if we can hear it.
Our dog is named Bonsai, so he came with that name. We think it fits him pretty well.
That is a great name for a dog.
Yeah, he's kind of short, like a bonsai tree, so it works.
Tell me, how long have you had Bonsai?
We've had him for a little over a year now, yeah.
Aw, you must be great friends.
Yeah, we are.
So here we definitely see that the users and the system are picking a specific topic they have mutual interest with. So for example, the major reason that we're able to win a $500,000 prize is really about the user experience. We actually deployed this chatbot, we call it Gunrock, in all Amazon Alexa devices. So if you have Alexa devices, you say, Alexa, let's chat or something, it will wake up our system and then you can talk to it. So we actually had millions of users interacted with our bot. And in the end of the day, the users are gonna rate us based on their feeling about whether they want to talk to the chatbot again. And then we are competing against like the average scores of all the user feedback. So user also give us like some oral feedbacks about general things. One of the users said, Alexa is now my best friend. I like to talk to you before I go to bed every day. So we do really see these conversational agents or smart home devices are really everywhere in our life. And with all these hardware deployment, we have been seeing there are a huge need or expectation of how can we make Alexa or Apple Siri smarter, do more complicated work and satisfy our needs. So what we do particularly here is talking about a specific type of conversational system, which is in between task-oriented and social conversational chatbot that actually requires the system to have a potential social capacity in order to complete the task, which is much harder. For example, one type of, one linear line of a system is persuasive dialogue systems, which means a system that can change people's belief and behaviors, or serve as a training system to train people how to persuade other people. So a simple question is, why do we need a persuasive system? Why do we need a chatbot or a robot to actually persuade us? But in the real world, there are a lot of cases, such as exercise persuasion. We have a project with UCSF on building a chatbot to remind people perform exercise daily. So it's really about the user wanted to do things, but it's really hard to motivate them to do things. So like exercise persuasion, social distancing. Even we have a chatbot that performs simulations to train suicide counselors. So we're not really actually doing the work, but we're training people to create simulation environments so that they get to experience different types of conversation in order to improve their training scores. So there are various cases in the world that we really require the system to have the ability to persuade users in order to satisfy users' goal. So how can we persuade people? In a lot of communication work, like back into a lot of theories, we already know that this is very difficult. Persuasion started with social psychology, and it really is flourishing when it goes into microeconomics, when people are talking about how do we do advertisement. And then also like negotiation, all these topics are super interesting within the human society. Now we're making a robot or a chatbot actually acquire certain ability that even most of the human cannot do well. How do we do it? So reading these books are definitely impossible. So we're taking a data-driven approach, trying to learn how good humans do things and how to learn from these good persuaders. Of course, we're going to collect data, understand the data in the level of semantics, and finally understand the level of strategy, what conversational strategies people would use in order to persuade other people. One of the challenges in terms of building conversational system is always not enough data. As we know, conversation is hugely different from question and answering, as we are having a multi-turn conversation. Inherently, we would have multiple different threads if we say something slightly different. So exponentially growing the possible paths in our everyday life. So how do we collect data that would actually cover all possible paths? It's almost impossible. So is there a way that we can constrain ourselves in a specific domain and not just looking at the surface form, but looking at the semantics in order to reduce the complexity of the problem? Of course, when we talk about conversational systems, we're actually talking about the product is going to talk to real users. While users, they're very diverse, they are very different from each other. Mike may be interested in talking basketball, or Michelle likes to talk about dogs. So different people would have different preferences. How do we make sure our system can adapt to individual users and make sure they're personalized towards this particular user in order to achieve the goal most effectively? Of course, even understanding semantics is very difficult. We know currently if you use a lot of these deep neural network models, you can do surface form pretty well. You can generate seemingly pretty natural conversational system responses on any news generation or similar topics. But still, understanding deep semantic is still very difficult. So as we know, there are various sort of news releases about chatbot misunderstanding semantics. For example, Microsoft Tay, which is a chatbot deployed back in 2016, because it doesn't really have sort of contextual understanding of the semantics. So he doesn't understand how people can get so creative in talking bad. So he adapted some of the words that are inappropriate within a day. So how do we make sure contextually we understand the semantics and we are able to deliver information that is safe to our users? Finally, we're talking about what is, if we understand exactly what the users say, that's still not enough. How you're saying it is very different, is very effective within different contexts as well. For example, if you're having a marriage proposal, like these flowers or blooms are much more effective than a pizza and card boxes. So how are you able to convey your semantics, but in a different manner within the context could have a huge impact on the results. So today we're going to talk briefly, sort of a skeleton of how do we build a conversational system that can persuade people. Specifically, we're going to focus on one particular task on persuading people to donate to charities. So it's a social, first we're going to do data collection. As we know, because we're taking a data-driven approach, we first need to know how people persuade each other to donate to the charity, so that we can learn from the people who are successful in this context. So then, as we know, we can collect all possible trajectory of conversation. So if we only have limited data, how do we build conversational systems? So we're going to talk about how do we leverage some semantic annotation in order to build models with only limited data. And then finally, we're going to talk about how can we utilize strategies to help us to optimize towards our goal. First of all, how do we collect data? So collected conversational data is very difficult. First, real production logs are not available to us, mostly due to privacy. People may say, you can look at customer service logs, right? People would call these companies all the time, but they all have privacy issues. They're very private information inside of these conversational dialogues. None of them would actually share their own data. So that's why in academic, how do we collect data is doing role play. So we ask mechanical Turkers or any type of crowd workers to actually play the role of different conversational tasks, such as, for example, you are a persuader, you're going to persuade other people, or you're a persuadee, how you're going to conduct. So role play in persuasion and negotiation is really a little bit more difficult in order to construct realistic examples. So in a collaborative task, if I tell you that you're going to collaboratively book a ticket together, then it's very clear instruction. Well, in these persuasion and negotiation tasks, everybody has a different utility, sort of utility function. And how to make sure that their task utility function aligns with their real incentive of completing the task is really difficult. So previously, there are a couple of conversational databases that collected, such as Deal No Deal or Craigslist Bargain, but there, unfortunately, the incentive was not perfectly aligned. So a lot of users are just trying to get the money, which results some of the conversation quality is less ideal. So for us, the first work in this ACL 2019 paper was how do we make sure we can design a experiment that can collect data that is as good as possible. So we try to use money as an incentive to elicit a more realistic behavior in human-human conversation. So we have two users, so they're going to be paired up. One is going to be the persuader. We tell them you're going to receive bonus when you're able to persuade the other person to donate. So your bonus is a proportion to that donation. So everyone comes to the task wants to earn more money. So they're really trying hard to persuade the other person so they can get more money. While on the other side, persuadee, they could donate their task earning, which means that they are able, we in the end of the day, we give them $2 bonus. They can choose whether they want to donate that $2 or they wanted to keep their $2 all to themselves. So because the persuadee as a Turker also wanted to keep their money, so it's really hard to persuade them to donate the money. So it's really, we need to look at how good these persuaders are. So the persuadee, when they come into the task, they don't really know how this will unfold. We were only telling them that you're going to talk about charity with another person. So before they come in, we ask them to do a pre-task survey. So that we asking them about personalities or decision styles or moral foundations, so that we understand how they are, so that we can correlate the data with the outcomes in the end. So in the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that the chatbot can utilize these informations. If we can get our survey, we can also infer these information from their Facebook profile and so on. And then they were engaged in a conversation for more than 10 turns. And finally, we asked them to confirm how much they want to donate. So the donation is actually directly going into the particular charity we pick called Save the Children. So there is real money involved. So persuaders, if he is able to persuade the other person to donate to the charity, he will get more money. And persuadees, if he is willing to donate because of all the persuasive messages that he received from the persuaders, then he will actually donate the money. In the end of the day, we actually find that a little bit more than actually half of the persuadees are donating to the charity. So here in particular, because we also selected a charity that is very big and have a lot of credible information that we can provide. So here we are able to collect 1,000 conversations, and throughout the include all the 1,000 conversations, we're able to collect the $400 donation for Save the Children. So here is an example conversation. We can see how good they are. So on the left is the persuader. You're probably on a computer right now, so you probably have quite a bit of money yourself. Don't you think you could spare maybe 25 cents for some needy children around the world? You say, no, thank you, the persuadee. Do you have children yourself? What if your children were in the position these kids are in? Wouldn't you want someone to help them? Where are those children's parents? If only they had a parental support, but in war-torn countries like Syria, their parents are being killed in wars or fighting for their country. They have no hope, and that's why they need your support. Please find it in your heart to just give a little bit tonight. That's all I'm asking. So we can see these conversations are pretty dense, and the persuaders are actually trying very hard to persuade the other one, and the other one trying to protect their own money, is trying to come up with reasons why these persuasive messengers are not working for them. Okay, do we have any questions before I go on to the next one? Let's look at the chat.
There's one question.
There indeed one. Yeah, go ahead.
How do we
asking how do you distinguish? Yeah, sorry, go on.
Okay, how do we distinguish between persuasion from manipulation in these systems? That's a good question. So in communication literature, there is a definition about persuasion and coercion. So here, I think a manipulation is sort of, I would call them coercion or something. Persuasion is really about that you could say things that is true. It has to be true, factual information. You can use lies in order to make the other person change their attitudes and belief. While manipulation, on the other side, as a sort of more negative connotation, has a more negative connotation, which doesn't mean that you have to be faithful. While persuasion is definitely a neutral word in a way that you have to be faithful, tell all the information in order to persuade the other person to change beliefs.
I do also have a clarification question. So when you're mentioning about the experimental setting here, the persuadee is actually donating the money that he earned or he or she earned from participating in this study, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So we usually set a base salary, and then if you do well, you get a bonus. You can donate your bonus.
I see.
Your base
salary.
So
fundamentally, they are donating their time, not actual money from their previous pocket, right? And do you observe, like, do you speculate that difference will essentially influence the quality of the data? I'm just assuming there is still a motivational difference here. Yes. Although I don't have any data supporting my speculation here.
Yeah, that's right. There is a slightly different difference here because if they don't donate the money, their bonus, they will receive the money in the end. So at the end of the day, you're still donating like a real money in the end.
True.
But it's different in terms of I'm asking you to donate your existing money, right? So it's slightly different, but in our setting, so this is best we can do.
I see. We do have another question from the chat as well. He is asking how to sort all the collected data, which can be massive and diverse, since both sides are real people. I think AMT basically do the recording, right? So
that's right.
Okay.
So we use Amazon Mechanical Turk, and then we have our own sort of engine to collect data that is based on a package, Facebook deployed. So right now, what we need to do is basically how can we make the chatbot to do jobs as good as the human persuader? So this is basically the goal. In order to do so, let's first understand what the conversations are. What are they talking about majorly? What are topics? So we're gonna use a intent scheme that we developed to understand the dialogues in a deeper level. So as we said before, this type of persuasive conversation, they have social components that talk about related stuff, and the task component that talks exactly on donation. In the social components, we're saying like for every sentence, I want to understand what are they talking in a more sort of syntactic and social way. So we're using a previous conversational annotation called a mitas that was developed in our group for building social chatbot. So like open question, what is it an open question? Is it a yes or no question? It's a greeting or is it thank you? So the reason that we are trying to separate them is because we already have some data that was collected in social conversational setting and it was annotated with these tags. So we can later actually use them to pre-train our model in order to resolve some of the problems in lack of data. Well, in terms of task component, we're looking at some intents that are specifically related to the donation task. Do you agree to donate? Do you disagree to donate? Are you asking questions about the task? So once that we annotated the conversation for, we annotated around 50 to 100 conversations on the successful ones in order to help us. So an annotated dialogue looks like this. So you're probably on a computer right now, so you probably have quite a bit of money. Don't you think you spared 25 cents? So this is task information, and the specific intent is request donation, propose to donate. People say, no, thank you, it's task information, disagree to donate. Do you have your children yourself? So now this is a social component. I mean, it's a yes or no question. What if your children were in a situation, wouldn't you want someone to help you? So it's a social component and a yes no question. Finally, what are those children's parents? Where are those children's parents? Social component, which is an open question. So now as we annotated some of the data with these kind of manually discovered intents, we're going to use them as scaffolds to help us to train a model so that we can have not only 1,000 data and still be able to train a pretty good model. So I don't know if everybody is very familiar with dialogue systems, so I still try to sort of tell a story about how we sort of change our dialogue flow from the very beginning to the end. So the classical dialogue system, or we call modular conversational dialogue framework, is quite popular from a couple of years ago. And it's still very popular within these production-based companies. So if you're thinking about Amazon Alexa or Google Home, most of their components are still using these modular-based dialogue system. So we split the conversational system into 4 components. When users say something, we first need to understand the intent. That's what we call natural language understanding unit. So we're talking about the same task, right? So the task is really to convert the natural language sentence. Tell me more about the organization. into a specific intent tag, such as inquiry of the task inquiry. So this is what an AU component is trying to do. So you can really think about this as a classification task. You can also make it a sequence to sequence one. And then once that you understand the intent of a specific sentence, then you need to understand, accumulate all the previous sentences intent in order to understand or track information that is critical to your task success, such as have we received donations so far? So this is the second process we call dialogue state tracking. Well, when we talk about state, it's really about important information we want to accumulate over time. And finally, once that we know so far all the information I need in order to make a decision for the robot, I took them in and trying to pick a action that the system will perform. For example, provide factual information to the user. So this is a process you can also formulate it into a classification task or a sequence to sequence learning task. And finally, I know that I'm going to provide factual information, but I still need to talk into a natural language sentence in order for the user to understand, so that we come into natural language generation process. So we convert the provided factual information to save the children, help millions of Syrian children who are facing the daily threats of violence. This is also a sequence to sequence process. So it's quite difficult and everything is chained up. So there are definitely a lot of drawbacks. First is it's difficult to update. If you find error with an understanding module and you collected more data to correct it, then all your output is kind of you have to update all the following components in order to make sure they're calibrated. You require a lot of experts to build these models and tune these models separately. And of course, every conversation have to be annotated with these kind of semantic tags, such as provide information or deliver information in order to be useful. So that's why a lot of people say, why can't we just do end-to-end? Of course, these days, like when you talk about GPT-2, GPT-3, these are all end-to-end models. Why don't I just put in the user's utterance and let it go into a giant neural network such as GPT-2? I can get an utterance back, right? This is how simple we would think that this could be. Of course, these kind of end-to-end framework has been also tested in our conversational settings, and it has been successful in certain settings, but it definitely has some drawbacks. It's very difficult to perform area analysis. As we know, the previous 4-stage components, every component's output has a semantic state. So you can at least check with them to see, if there's an error in this component or that component. So I can collect targeted data to correct them. But in end-to-end, I just don't know what went wrong. If I got a wrong system feedback, I have to tune all my all my 2,000 parameters again, or I need to collect more data. I just don't know what is the best way. For a simple information request task, it really requires 1,000 dialogues to train. So basically, because it doesn't have the semantic scaffolds, so you really wanted to make sure that you have a lot of data. And these models are usually using these data in an efficient way. So I would say right now, if you have a lot of data end-to-end is probably the way you can try. Or if you don't, then you wanted to use something in between. So this is where some of our work come from. So we're trying to use, combine the best of the both frameworks, trying to have still 4 modules within our pipeline, but we're trying to train them together so that you can actually feed in the supervision from this kind of sequence to sequence model, but at the same time that if you don't have these supervisions, you don't need to feed into the model. So it will be a simpler encoder decoder model. So we have 1 encoder and 4 decoders. So each decoder corresponds to the previous component, and all of them are trained jointly. So the big model looks like this. So we are using the input such as previous belief state, what is the previous response of the system, what is current response of the user, and they're sharing, all the models are sharing the same encoder. And first, you're going to decode what the user's intent is. Basically, what do you have in mind as a task inquiry? And then you're going to accumulate all the information you have so far and infer that so far the donation is still 0. And finally, we're looking into some database and if we need it to tell that the system is going to provide factual information at this point. And finally, generating the natural language sentence of the system. So the nice thing is really this, this model is very easy to optimize. It's just, you can think about it as a multitask setting. So first, when you're looking to put in the input, the natural language understanding component is generating a hidden state called MT. And then the next component or decoder, the dialog state tracking model, will be conditioning on this hidden state in order to generate another hidden state ST. So the information are sort of connected or in a way that feed it from one module to the other through hidden state instead of symbolic output. So it doesn't, if you have an error in the previous stage, you can still backpropagate to correct these errors. So which is much more flexible from this kind of modular framework. So another thing is, if you don't have these labels, you don't have to update all these modules. If you don't have semantic understanding, you just have the dialogue, then you just update the NLG module instead of all the previous ones. So it's very compatible to whatever end-to-end models that you already have. Now we're sort of ready to actually train a conversational system that can persuade people to do donations. We first pre-trained the model with social conversational system. Basically we have millions of social conversational system we collected from Alexa. So we can pre-train this so that it can at least do some of the social conversational settings, such as greetings and how are you and stuff. And then we're gonna feed in the conversational data that doesn't have these semantic annotations. We have 900 conversations that do not have them, so they will sort of go run in to actually make the conversational system can actually talk about persuasion, but not specifically on things. And then finally, we're gonna make sure that the annotated data are fed in with all these intents and intents built in, so they will actually track of the intents. So the advantage of the MOS is obvious that it's easier to update because it's just end-to-end trainable. It requires less expert involvement because it's flexible in the framework. It's easier to perform error analysis because it has 4 decoders. Although all the informations are connected through hidden states, but you can still decode the outputs at every decoder so that you can check which component is making more error than the other ones. So they can collect the targeted data to correct them. And it can handle complex tasks with a lot of intents. Finally, in terms of whether I should get more training dialogues, or I should do more manual annotation, it really depends on what you have at the moment. If you already have a lot of conversations, then I think that you just need to sort of do very little annotation. If you don't have a lot of conversation, for example, you're a startup, then you only have 50 conversations, I would regularly recommend you to do some manual annotation in order to improve your conversational systems performance. So now we are ready to actually evaluate our conversational systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to build different models, and then we're going to deploy it on Amazon Mechanical Turk as well. So it's the same setting of the data collection, except that one of the persuader is now the chatbot. And we do tell the persuadee or the user that you're going to talk to a chatbot about a charity. So here the baseline is just an end-to-end model that doesn't utilize any of the label. The MOS one is the one that uses 300 of the dialogues that has label and 700 doesn't have a label. So everybody can get access to the vanilla social conversational data. And the human is doing the data collection, how many people actually donated. So we definitely do see that there is a 5% like improvement if we have more semantic labels, so that we know a bit more in terms of the trajectory of the conversational progress. Well, we're still a bit far away from how humans do it. So like 20%, less than 20%. So that's why we need to look at the conversational systems response and see what can we do to make it better. Any questions so far? We can take maybe one question before we move on.
So there's one question. Can we use this for persuading people to buy? So, or my related question is, can you transfer the system to a different persuasion task?
That's a good question. So some of the information can be transferred, such as semantic information about like a tags that you may wanted to reuse, such as inquiry of a task information or something like that. But you would have to collect the targeted information in order to make sure that the chatbot is actually talking in that specific domain. So you can transfer some of the information, use it as a pre-training or whatever, but you still need some target data in order to transfer. Of course, some of the strategies we were going to talk about, and some of the semantic intents you can utilize in other tasks, such as recommendation task and other things. Yeah, of course, like an advertisement or personalized advertisement, it's definitely another thing a lot of industry are looking at. Okay, let me just go forward. So one of the things that we know is natural language generation models are very dangerous. For example, if the user say, can I get a refund on my donation? What a good idea. Chatbot says, yes, of course, everyone can get a refund, which is terrible in a lot of sense. If you are actually a social chatbot in a customer service area, then everybody can get a refund. It's going to bankrupt the company, which is not fun. So here, one of the biggest reasons that, for example, the chatbot is saying yes, of course, is because you never seen a training data. Basically, in training data, nobody asks, can I get a refund? And according to statistic, when people say, can I do something? Most of the training data would say yes. And he's basically copying some of the previous things. So how do we make sure that this thing doesn't happen in our conversation system? I'm going to make sure that our system doesn't lie is a very important thing to resolve before we deploy our system to anywhere that is not experimental setting. So we have basically wanted to see if we can create a safety net in semantic space in order to avoid such disaster. So we're going to introduce response ranker. What you can think about is you have your conversational tree. There are certain passes, we're going to cut it off, saying that if you express this intent in this particular context, you are not allowed. So we're going to filter out responses that go into that subtree. So what we're going to do is for every conversational context, for example, how much would you donate yourself? So the user sometimes asks the chatbot or ask the persuader, if you would donate. If you don't know donate, I'm not going to donate, right? So the intent in this is request donation amount. There's no semantic stock so far is because there's no agreed donation amount. And as any generation models, you can do multiple samples, sampling and generate possible multiple candidates. And you can pick a candidate with respect to the context. So for example, candidate 1 says, I will donate $1. The system, so for example, we encoded in that if people ask you, you just say $1, we're actually going to donate that $1. Or you can say, thanks. You can say, I don't have money. So refuse donation. So all these things, some of them may be valid, some of them are not. So now it's really which one should we choose? So according to one interesting thing that we can do is we can ask a human to demonstrate. So we're gonna, so doing the mechanical Turk study, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna collect some training example. We're gonna ask a student who in communication to actually select a, based on the intents. So we have a very limited number of intents. So he's gonna look at just the intents to pick which intent suits the context better. So he will provide us, for example, 50 or 100 examples in demonstration. Then later we're gonna learn how to rank which intent, given the intent history, is the best intent to go forward. So now we can optimize in terms of we're going to select the best intent, and we're going to make sure that the dangerous intent are never selected. For example, we're going to imitate it. So just using like 50 dialogues as demonstration, we can improve almost 10% of the people in donation, because we're making sure that we're picking the best one. For example, I will donate $1 is better than thanks or I don't have money, in order to elicit more donation. We're making sure that people, when say, can I get a refund, these kind of dangerous intent, we'll never say more than $1. Okay. So still, we're seeing like a 7% gap between our chatbot and human. So how do we actually further improve it? So one thing is that we're going to look at some data and do some error analysis to see why this is the case. So here's an example. People say, have you ever heard of a charity called Save the Children? We say, no, I haven't. What is it about? It's an international organization that promotes children's rights, provide relief and supports children in developing countries. Does that sound like something you could get behind? So if you look at the intent, it's proposed asking the user to donate, and it's using a specific strategy we call credibility, which means that by providing credible information in order to complete persuasion. Well, the user is going to say, no, thank you, being negative towards these strategies. I'm already making a difference in many children's life. Might be a parent himself. Save the Children was founded in 1919, and the charity is highly rated. So here we're going to ask for a request donation again, but we're using the same strategy, which is providing credible information. As we know, as a human, when we read it, we know that if you keep saying these things, it seems doesn't go well. So there are a better way to change a strategy in order to sort of make users to agree with you more. So one possibility is maybe use a different strategy. That's great. It sounds like it's an issue you really care about then. Why not put some of that effort into a charity that's going really great work like Save the Children? So this is particular called logical persuasion. Here, because he is trying to relate to the user, hey, you really care about this, logically, why don't you do this? So this particular one is pretty good within the context. Maybe the user is able to be more engaged in the conversation and know more about the charity and how the procedure of the donation work. So really we're talking about, can we select strategies with respect to user reaction or their profile information in order to be more successful in these conversations? So there are a couple of different persuasive strategies throughout the literatures that people would that we can identify in our data set, such as credibility, as we talked about. The other one is kind of emotional appeal. You're trying to rate, sort of employ empathy, such as millions of children in Syria growing up facing the daily threat of violence. They're really having problems. Would you want to donate? Logical is trying to form a logic. Self-modeling is quite interesting. People will say, I will donate as well. I will match your donation. So use himself as a model, sort of like example in order to encourage the other user. Personal story, telling a story that you related to your charity or yourself in order to encourage people to donate. Provide donation information, so the details of make the process smoother. You can also foot in the door, which is very interesting in terms of even 5 cents would help a lot. Once people donate 5 cents, we say, oh, why don't you donate a little bit more? That would help even more children. So we can annotate the conversation on the successful trajectory that actually basically in the conversation that people actually donate. So we can see how they react to these different strategies. Are they positive? Are they negative? Or are they able to get a donation in the end? So we can see these kind of reactions, and we wanted to see, do these trajectories have common paths? So there, if I say credibility first and people positive, I should use emotional and see how that works. If we use emotional, it's negative. Credibility, it's still neutral. Should we use some other strategies? So as we know, that we had this kind of 4 decoders previously, which means that if I know the semantic is request to donate, I just generate a sentence. But if I put it in that the semantic is request to donate, but I'm also putting in an extra tag that's saying I wanted to use an emotional strategy instead of a logical strategy, that would generate a totally different surface level of natural language response for the chatbot. So this is how things work. So instead of just having 4 decoders, we're inserting an additional sort of module called Strategy Planner in between the Dialog Policy Planner and Natural Language Generation module. So of course, the dialog history will have to also comment in what type of strategies that you said before. But this simple one doesn't really encompass all the information that we need because history is purely on semantic information. We wanted to put in all these kind of credibility, positivity, or logical sort of sequences that we have already used in our dialogues. Finally, these kind of symbolic strategy trajectory really doesn't take advantage of the information shared among all successful conversations. These ones are just so far what we use so far. So we need to look at, according to the probabilities, if we use credibility first and then and the user is positive towards that, you're more likely you should use logic instead of the other ones. So we wanted to make sure that if we can just extract some more common knowledge among the successful ones and lead the conversation to that point. So we really wanted to do some like common strategy structures that are sort of like more loosely we can discover in all conversational data. So particularly here, you can use various type of methods, for example, n-grams, or today here we're using finite state transducers. So the idea is very simple. If you have all these strategies and you wanted to make sure that you discover all these kind of states. So in reality, we have a lot of the latent states that we actually traverse between so that we can actually optimize towards an entropy. So finally, once we have these kind of latent states with maybe 1,000 or so, how can we sort of combine it with our existing module? So as we know that if we have these kind of latent states, we can actually represent these latent states using how likely certain strategies are going into my states or going out to my states. So for example, we just have 5 strategies, then everything is going to be proportional towards these occurrence of these 5 strategies. And then you will make it into a vector. And then once you have this vector, you can combine it with the semantic information through a hierarchical encoder. So the idea is for every sentence, you can use an utterance encoder in order to get a sort of condensed information in the middle, and then combine it with that every sentence that's so far to get a dialogue encoder. But if you put in this sort of, we call it strategy information that we just got from this kind of FST, you can combine or can just simply concatenate them together. So your dialogue encoder would output not only the semantic information, but also the strategy information in between. So finally, you're connecting all these kind of latent states together with each individual decoders. And finally, you can do a little bit better. So we can, if we label 300 dialogues with these kind of strategy labels, we're able to increase the success for another 4%. But still, we are a little bit like only 2-3% away from human. We do see like our inject semantics helps you a lot and improve safety by looking at some human demonstration on the semantic level helps. Finally, tracking strategy helps a little bit more. So one of our other paper on really look at personality adaptation, which is actually can do actually better than human even. So for example, for a particular people who are, for example, neurotic, they're more likely to donate if we are able to answer all these credibility related questions. So they feel like this is a sort of a credible task and they actually go along with it. So we do see that building a conversational agent really requires a lot of sort of skills. You need to first understand what the people say. If there are multiple languages, then it's even harder. You need to manage the conversation. And finally, you need to generate language so that the user can understand what you're doing. And also, when we talk about communication, it's not just typing words. It can be text, it can be audio information, visual information, or touch information in the communication. A lot of us are actually utilizing understanding people's emotion and other things in order to make sure that the conversation is more effective. Common sense is very important in order for us to optimize our trajectory, making sure that all the utterance generated are fact-checked. Finally, as we know, in human-human conversations, we're basically collecting human-human data, and then we're training a model, but the training distribution is human-human conversation. But while in the testing domain, it's a human chatbot conversation. It's not the same distribution as human-human conversation. So different people may take in chatbots in a different way. Some of them would treat similar as treating human. Some of them would treat them very entirely different as an agent. So can I say things that that human would say? Would that actually offend people? Do people like different types of personality of chatbots? Are big factors that people would consider in terms of this is a successful chatbot or not. So my lab works on all these various areas. We publish mainly in ACL, these kind of NLP conference or AI conference such as AAAI or iClear. Also, we do publish in some human-computer interaction conference such as CHI or IVA. So so I'm actually right now taking a sort of having a new course on dialogue system. We're gonna sort of push all the information to my website so that we would have a reading list. If you're interested in dialogue systems, I'm happy to give you more information and happy to take more questions as well.
Thank you, Zhou. I think we have a couple of questions from our dialogue here in Zoom, right? And we can, if you are comfortable to read through, or we can actually have the host to select one.
I can just read through some of them. I may not be able to get to all of them in 5 minutes. Let's take one of them. Can we use this idea for persuading people to buy basically a virtual salesperson? Yes, we can. But we cannot really just take the system and just run with it. We have to have some adaptations to it. In the example dialogue, there was a phrase that asks user to put the children in the position of the children that need help, and it is labeled as a social. But isn't it also in another task question that tries to propose donation? Is there any possible augmentation to these kind of gray area questions? It really is depending on how you create your annotation scheme. So our annotation scheme is quite sort of strict in terms of if it doesn't relate, it's not related to the organization Save the Children or about has to be exactly on the Save Children or about donation process of the things we consider to be social. Because in social conversations, people still talk about children's and talk about Syrian, these kind of popular topics, because we see these information might also have overlap with our social conversation sort of database. So that's why we are sort of pushing them that way. To what extent the system is explainable? So we do generate these kind of intermediate semantic labels, such as I give you this sentence, I'll tell you this semantic intent is propose a request donation. I'm trying to use a emotional strategy. So that's everything that we can give in terms of explainable. Of course, there might be certain things that people are looking for is why you're using this particular strategy. So that's something that we haven't been doing. Maybe we'll be able to tell you in the future that because this person is introvert or this person what, so that's why we're selecting this strategy instead of the other one.
Well, if I may chime in here, we are dealing with similar issues in VQA, as you're comparing modularized design with end-to-end training, I guess the common trade-off here is you still need internal or intermediate labels to somewhat guide the training of each modules. In such a sense, those internal encodings can be further interpreted into semantic meanings for interpretation, right?
That's right. Yeah, the modular network is also, I think Jacob, Andreas, they had all these kind of modular work. But it's just in terms of it's explainable, it's modular, it has different compositions. So that's why that's sort of the nice way, but also it requires annotation.
Yeah, well, maybe let me be a little bit selfish because I do have a few questions myself as well, and we're running out of time. Well, as my training background in robotics and activation, so whenever you talk about natural language understanding and decision making and generation, I'm seeing it as perception, decision making, and generating actions, right? You're generating actions to interact with another human being, and here you're treating another human being as the environment, or a group of human beings as the environment. Then it comes with a sequence of questions. First of all, is there any policy learning can be adopted here to make the generation more robust towards a certain group of people? And then if you're treating human being as an environment compared to as a typical roboticist taking the physical world as the environment, human beings' response to a specific kind of even the same input might be different, right? So for example, for one day, he might donate 5 cents, and then the second day, the same person in a different mood may not donate at all. So essentially, it's possible for you to get training data that have exactly the same flow, but the different reward or even opposite rewards at the end. I'm also really wondering if all this can be incorporated and how you guys are speculating or envisioning to address.
That's a really good question. So if you look at my sort of the stuff today, it's all supervised learning. There is no reinforcement learning, right? There is some imitation learning, but not until reinforcement learning. So the major reason that we actually had a couple of reinforcement learning paper in the visual conversational dialogue system domain, which has a more specific sort of a more controlled environment. For example, we have guess which, or like a visual 20 question game, these kind of environment, then the user's response is deterministic. So either yes or no, there's factual information you can simulate. But if it's like a really social chat, it's impossible to simulate the user.
That's true.
Which means that if you're able to simulate the user, you already have a good system.
Already.
So it's a chicken and egg problem.
Exactly.
So one of the possibilities that people tried before is trying to sort of have a simple model, or you can have simulate the user in various different sort of using different models to simulate the user, and trying to make sure that the system do well in all these simulated world in order to evaluate the system. But it's still like a really difficult task. So that's why RL and dialogue system wasn't that sort of flushing as to how robotics are.
Human being is always the weakest link, a system you need to deal with, right? So it's hard to predict and almost impossible to model at this stage.
Yeah.
So actually, the seminar could go a bit longer if you have time to address some of the questions. Of course, it's up to your schedule as well. If you're running for a next event,
fine.
Yeah, we can always we can end this seminar at any time, whenever you are comfortable with.
Okay, I just try to answer most of the questions. Let's see.
Appreciate it.
So we have how much of a response ranking is possible as the search space is quite large? That's an interesting question, because our search space is not that large, because our search space is defined by the number of semantic intents. We just have like around 20 semantic intents, so the permutation wasn't that large. And there are a lot of intents are not available within certain contexts. So the search space is relatively smaller. Adding to the question of age, wouldn't it be more helpful if we don't assume that the user has children? How do we build a system that will work fine with children of different age groups? That's a good question that you, we didn't specifically trying to do A/B tests of one system that deals with people with children or the other one deals without children, because we haven't seen that much of a difference when people were talking about this issue. But definitely that would be something that you can consider to be to take into your parameter or profile and trying to use that element inside of the modeling. Maybe tell an emotional story can be better compared to giving out plain information. That's a good question. As we said before, it also depends on who is actually listening to it. So if it's a neurotic person who actually cares more about logical information, credible information, like emotional story doesn't work for him. Well, for an emotional decision maker, like emotional story might be much better than plain information.
I would like to chime in here also, as well.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Have you guys ever tested a strategy like peer pressure, right? You don't include it here, and I assume that's widely used as well, right? Look, all your mates are donating, and this is some of the data. Maybe you should consider.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. We haven't been using that as much because these are Turkers. We could definitely tell them a lot of other Turkers that participate in our task are donating. What would you think? But that's a good question. But we haven't really tried that strategy at that moment.
Thanks.
So sorry,
yeah,
just so in your data collection process, your the persuadees didn't really have any instructions, right? They were I mean, it was open-ended in the sense that they could decide to donate or not donate. But
that's right.
What if you instruct them to always reject, like reject in the best way possible? Will that give you more data?
It wouldn't give a good data that is realistic in testing. Right. If you always ask them to reject, then I don't know which strategy works better.
Okay.
Are the persuasive strategies defined by humans? Yes, they're predefined by humans, but we didn't really tell people that these are strategies that you can use. We just give them some examples and they can pick and choose, or they can come up with their own ones. We are predefining them just for the annotation. Can we use WaveNet or VGG-like method as audio encoder and use the rest of the process almost the same to adapt the audio? So really what we, everything we have here is just using the typing text. So all the Turkers are typing and the robot is actually giving out typing text. So there is no audio involved. Usually when we do audio-based conversational system, we are still trying to use automatic speech recognition to convert the audio into natural language. Then we do all the processing. Okay, we have another question. The part where you mentioned that with a slight variation, there could be infinite branches trees. How exactly do you put constraints on the machines from trying every possible combination of words? Thank you. Because we are doing a supervised learning. So that's why we're trying to make sure everything was optimized towards imitating what the human data was doing. So that's why we do, and we also have a lot of pre-training data. So as we know that, so that's why the natural language sentence that we generate is more likely to be similar to how human would talk. Mirroring the performance based on successful donation rates can be questionable because every single time you're occurring different person or they can be under different moods. So that's right. We sample like 100 users or 200 users per condition. So that's why we hope that it will even out in a lot of cases in different conditions. But for sure, there may be like a certain model is unlucky that it has users that is all very quite restricted in terms of donation. Some of them may be lucky. But if you sort of try to do 100 and 200, it usually evens out. And one user can only do the task once. So you're not allowed to do it again. So in order to make sure that it's sort of a equal measurement. We talked about detecting the user's emotion from the conversation in that space. What if the person's emotion is negative at the moment of conversation? Will the task change to changing the user emotion to a positive one, or just go on with the original task of donation purgation? So the task is still going to be persuading people to be donate. So we're not talking about emotion as negative. We're talking more about being negative towards the request of the user. So for example, we're asking a particular using a particular strategy, but people is negative towards the donation. So we're trying to change that negative towards donation into positive towards donation, which is just being successful in the task. We're not tracking like an individual user's emotion over time. Okay, I think that will be everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
for having me.
Tejas, would you like to conclude today's seminar?
Yeah,
Since
sure.
you are the host.
Yeah, so this was a very informative talk and covered a lot of different work that you've done. And so I really appreciated the three approaches like data, semantics, and strategies. And a lot of times the strategy aspect is kind of brushed away in NLP. So this was very informative. Thank you so much, Zhou.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you for joining today's seminar.
Hope to visit Arizona sometime. Bye.
Yeah,
do an
you bet.
applause for the thing.
Just let us know. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stop recording.
Thank you.